Hello and welcome to Bolton Circuit Thought for the Day for the 13th of November. And our reading is taken from the book of Genesis, chapter 32, and it's part of the story of Jacob. That night, Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. And then the man said to him, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." And Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask me my name?" And then he blessed him there. And so Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. And therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the tendon attached to the socket of the hip, because the socket of Jacob's hip was touched near the tendon. Now, Jacob's life story is a troubled tale full of darkness and difficulty, shadow and subterfuge, and a lot of it was all his own fault. The book of Genesis makes no attempt to conceal the fact that he was, among other things, a crook. At birth, he was given a name which meant liar, which seems unfortunate, but it was actually a good choice. Because, as you may well remember, Jacob duped his intellectually challenged brother Esau out of his inheritance. And then he tricked his aged father into giving him his older brother's blessing as well. Well, there was nothing else to do after that but run away, because Esau was livid. And so Jacob fled to his mother's relatives. He married and became prosperous, albeit at his father-in-law's expense. But later, when Laban, his father-in-law, was looking the other way, Jacob sneaked off with not only the man's daughters, but just about everything else that wasn't nailed down. It seems that Jacob was never satisfied. He wanted the moon, and if he'd managed to con heaven out of that, he would have been back the next morning for the stars to go with it. He had a lot of trouble in life, but it would be fair to say that he brought it on himself. In spite of that, though, we are told that God was with him. Many years after he'd swindled his brother, God told Jacob it was time to return to his native country. Now, this was never going to be an easy homecoming. God had forgiven Jacob for his deception, but Esau was an unknown quantity. "Go," God told him. "I will be with you, and I will bless you." So Jacob's large family travelled to the promised land. Hoping to win his brother's favour, Jacob sent messengers ahead with generous gifts for Esau. But to his dismay, the messengers returned with the news that there was trouble ahead. Esau was coming to meet him all right, but he had an army of 400 men with him. And so that dark night, Jacob was understandably scared. He was terrified. He may only have had himself to blame for the danger that he was in, but he still felt able to turn to God in prayer. First, he thanked God for all his grace in the past. Then he confessed his own weaknesses. He gave a clear account of his fears and then made a humble request for help. And all in all, it was a pretty well perfect prayer. He brought his troubles to God. Now, what would happen next? have some happy childhood memories of watching the wrestling on a Saturday afternoon. Now, of course, this was before the days of WWE with its sleek costumes and slick merchandise. In my day, wrestlers were overweight men in dodgy leotards with names like Big Daddy and Giant Haystacks. And those of you with memories like mine will remember the utterly predictable nature of any match that involved these two. Giant Haystacks would always try to cheat. Boo went the crowd. Big Daddy would charge across the ring, throwing his enormous stomach out. Haystacks would be flattened. Big Daddy would then perform the belly splash, jumping down onto his adversary. Victory! The baying crowd would chant, "Easy, easy!" And then the camera would cut back to two respectable sports presenters who would sit and discuss the match in the studio as if this was a perfectly normal way to spend a Saturday afternoon. Now, Olympic wrestling is an ancient sport with a 4,000-year history, and it's an act of ritual fighting during which wrestlers try to subdue their opponent while avoiding serious injury, and it is as much a test of strength and determination as it is of style and skill. Now, the night before he met Esau, Jacob wrestled with a mysterious, shadowy figure until daybreak. Someone so powerful that he was eventually able to disable Jacob at a single stroke. Someone who refused to tell Jacob his name. Someone who Jacob eventually realised wasn't actually a man at all. Nothing requires more drive and dogged determination than wrestling. In many ways, it is an excellent spiritual metaphor for hard times. Jacob kept his ground. Though the struggle continued throughout the night, his resolve did not falter. He was determined to have God's blessing, even to the point of having his hip dislocated, rather than go away without one. Now, can you relate to that? Have you ever wrestled with God in prayer? Have you, driven by desperation, ever dared to grapple with God, to struggle with him, to fight with him, to use every ounce of strength that you've got? And if you have, was it like Jacob during some of the darkest times of your life? Now then, I'm glad of any excuse to show off my new puppy. Here he is. His name's Bodhi, and in this video he's just 8 weeks old. Now, he's a Springer Spaniel. He's a lively chap, and one of the things we've been told we need to do is make sure he knows who's boss. So one of the reasons Nigel's wrestling him onto his back and making him be cradled while he has his paws dried is so that he knows that he's got to submit to us. Having said that, they still enjoy a good wrestle, these two, fighting over the blankets, playing with toys, being careful not to pull those baby teeth out of alignment when fighting over something. And it's lovely to see. It's really important, this play fighting, wrestling, matching strength with the puppy, playing a game, but a game that teaches important lessons. Because when Bodhi pushes things too far, Nigel will assert his full strength and show him who's really in charge. That night at Peniel is shrouded in mystery. There, God allowed Jacob to wrestle with him, even though he could defeat him with a mere touch. And as a result of that struggle, the relationship between God and Jacob changed. God blessed him and changed his name from Jacob, which, if you remember, means the liar, to Israel, because he had struggled with God and with humans and had overcome. And Jacob's experience that night pretty well summed up his career. God had led him back to confront Esau, bringing about a crisis which spurred Jacob on to pray, compelling him to struggle with God. And as a result, God brought about a change. He brought him through the crisis. He completed Jacob's transformation into the man we know as Israel, the father of the 12 tribes. And if Jacob had not faced that crisis with his brother, he would not have met God face to face that night. And I wonder, is it possible that God allows his people to experience these difficult or seemingly impossible situations, provoking them to wrestle with him in prayer? Life, as many of you are aware, throws all sorts of crises at us. And when we are vulnerable, when we are frightened, when we feel like we're under attack, keeping faith with God can be more than a struggle. We find ourselves pleading with God, but we also want to fight with him and demand an explanation for the situation that we're in. But amazingly, it would seem that God is prepared for us to wrestle with him in this way. And if we persevere, he will bring us through. Like Jacob, the experience could well injure us, leaving us with a permanent limp. But even so, we will usually find that we have been transformed by the experience into a new person.